Chapter 27 to 28. I frowned slightly as I watched Lee Kun and Garakuen make their way down to the arena from the stands, a feeling of worry building up in my chest. Would there have been enough changes to canon to allow Lee Kun to actually walk away from this? Or would history repeat itself? If memory served, the initial injury that Lee Kun had received from Garakuen in the original timeline was just a broken leg, something that all taijutsu fighters had to deal with at some point and easily recoverable from. What had almost ended his career as a shinobi had been the further injuries to his arm and spine that Gaara had inflicted on him after the sand user had already won. Garakuen was just as expressionless as ever, but I knew that that was simply a facade for the bloodthirsty personality that idiot Raza and Shikaku had cultivated. The automatic defense, sand shield, and final defense, sand armor, had allowed Garakuen to develop a supreme being complex, as nothing had been able to hurt him in years, not even his own father. His loneliness and dislocation from his peers had driven him somewhat mad after another idiot, Yashimaru, had almost killed him on his father's orders. Raza had obviously been trying to kill Garakuen's emotions, in an even less humane way than Danzo had tried with his root operatives. Wow, someone being worse than Danzo in that department, harsh. By contrast, Lee Kun was just as much an excited ball of energy as he had always been. If things were going to turn out like they had in the original timeline, then everyone was going to see why a ninja did not need chakra or talent to be a force to be reckoned with. I took in a calming breath as I looked between the two. Are the both of you ready? I questioned, getting nods from the both of them as Lee gave me a nice guy pose. Very well, begin. I will just have to be ready to act if I am needed. Lee Kun exploded into motion at my announcement as he threw a punch at Garakuen so quickly that if you had blinked, you would have missed it. Just as quickly, however, a tendale of sand blocked his fist. Karura-san's dying will to protect her son was almost enough to make me cry. But, it wouldn't do for me to do that right here and now as I schooled my features carefully, keeping a close eye on the ongoing match. The Kazakage's son is quite talented it seems, Hiruzen-sama commented, looking over at me with a raised eyebrow. Perhaps, I replied evenly. But it seems like he is wasting his potential to me, he seems more like a wild animal to me right now than a shinobi. Hiruzen-sama hummed in agreement as he nodded. Indeed, he is quite bad at hiding his intentions, isn't he? He sighed as he shook his head. Such a shame, with the proper guidance, he could become truly amazing. I closed my eyes as I nodded. That he could, I murmured in agreement as Lee began to backflip away from the approaching sand. Garakuen wasn't even trying hard right now, I could tell. He was playing with Lee Kun, who had no way of attacking other than with his fists and feet. I would have to ask Gai-san why he didn't give Lee Kun more training in weapons, as that would be a very useful addition to his arsenal. In the original timeline, Lee Kun had only ever used a 6-section staff a grand total of once, during the Crescent Moon Kingdom incident. Making a note to bring that up with Gai-san, I refocused on the match as Lee Kun deftly avoided Garakuen's sand attacks with the minimal amount of movement necessary. Really, Lee Kun was nothing short of a genius in his own way, how could he be anything else when standing on this stage with nothing but his taijutsu? Lee Kun was forced back, the green-clad genin landing on the statue of the hand seals above me. Ah. It was about to happen. Lee. Take M off. Gai-san boomed with a nice guy pose. Really, those weights of his were ridiculous, I couldn't help but note just how deep of a crater they made upon landing as Lee Kun began stretching. Really, Gai-san? I chuckled in amusement. You truly did find a diamond in the rough. Because really, what else could Lee Kun be if he not only was able to endure such continual hellish training, but flourish under it? The crowd gasped in shock as Lee Kun vanished from sight, no jutsu like my Inaba flicker, just pure speed. Seriously, I shudder at the through of Lee Kun actually being able to use jutsu with his current work ethic. Garakuen's eyes widened in shock as something struck his shield behind him, only for there to be nothing there as he turned to face the threat. Another strike hit the shield from behind, making him turn once more, confusion obvious in his eyes as blows started to rain on his shield from all directions without pause. I had my own Sharingan active to help me track Lee Kun's movements as he rapidly moved around the circumference of Garakuen's shield, probing it for weak points with rapid-fire jabs and kicks before he wound a punch-up and broke through the shield, grazing Garakuen's cheek. Before the Jinchuriki could even react to this, Lee Kun was already moving away and launching a kick at Garakuen's back, the sand struggling to keep up with the speed of the genin. Truly, in terms of pure physical capabilities, Lee Kun is nearly at the Jonin level, Hiruzen-sama commented with a proud smile. But, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that will be enough. I wouldn't say that, I think Likuan still has some more tricks up his sleeve, I said with a chuckle. I have no doubt about that, Hiruzen-sama assured with a nod as Likuan managed to land a solid blow on Garukuan's cheek. But I do not believe his current mindset is that of a chunin at this time. I grimaced a bit in response, unable to counter his point. The simple truth of the matter was that Likuan's limitation was not his lack of ability to fully utilize chakra outside of the basic self-reinforcement and walking exercises. It was his mindset of charge the enemy that held him back the most. Really, while his taijutsu is very powerful, I would even go as far as saying it was better than my own, he was single-minded in his approach as to how he used it. Rather than trying to brute force his way through, he should be seeking other avenues of attacks, like leaving behind explosive tags when he punched through the sand. Bluntly, he was not acting like a ninja. I knew he was capable of being stealthy after the time skip in the original timeline, but right here, right now, he was as stealthy and subtle as an elephant. His combat abilities were unbelievable considering his inability to use most external chakra jutsu, but I was forced to agree with Hiruzen-sama in this regard. Likuan needed far more tempering before he was ready to be a chunin. It was a shame, but it didn't look like anything would be changing from this fight. Letting out a sigh, I watched as Likuan unleashed the front lotus on Garukuan before signaling a nearby chunin. Have the medics prep the surgery theater, I instructed in a low voice, watching as everyone witnessed Garukuan's replacement. Yes, Yuriko-sama, the chunin confirmed before disappearing, getting a raised eyebrow from Hiruzen-sama. Just in case, he questioned curiously. I nodded in response. I have a feeling that Likuan is going to go overboard, and Garukuan will follow suit, I replied calmly. Not to mention the fact that Garukuan's bloodlust has been growing by the second. Hiruzen-sama hummed in response, the Jinchuriki of Shikaku did a good job of hiding it, mostly, but for shinobi like myself and Hiruzen-sama, it was plain as day how much he wanted to kill Likuan. Agreed. Be ready to act if Garukuan does go too far. That was my intention, Hiruzen-sama. I retorted with a small snort. Hiruzen-sama chuckled at my response, glancing over to me in the corner of his eye as I tensed for action, my eyes narrowing as Likuan began to open his inner gates. Gai-san. I sighed in resignation. To be able to open the gates at his age, a remarkable feat, Hiruzen-sama nodded slowly before sighing. Sadly, using it like this will seriously damage his body, to the point that he will be in hospital for most of the next month at least. A poor decision. I nodded in response. His body isn't prepared for the strain of anything more than the first gate, I agreed. It has yet to finish maturing and isn't stable enough to channel the raw chakra blocked by the gates. Hiruzen-sama smirked over at me. I do hope that you will be able to ensure he can correct that fact, he informed me. I shall do my best, I assured him, smiling a bit. Although, it would be easier if Tsunade-san was here as well. Just as I finished speaking, I was treated to one of the most awe-inspiring sights of the pre-timeskip show, Likuan pummeling Garukuan in midair like a punching bag. He moved so fast that even my Sharingan at the 3-tomo level was barely enough to see the way he moved. He hit the red-headed Jinchuriki so many times that I would have lost count had it not been for my eyes. Wrapping Garukuan in bandages, Likuan drew back a fist as he sped down towards the bound Jinchuriki. Hidden Lotus, he shouted before slamming his fist into Garukuan, sending him slamming into the ground like a missile, sending a large dust cloud up. Temari-chan and Kankuro-kun looked horrified, which was heartening to see. They really did want to see Garukuan as their brother. Likuan landed awkwardly, his muscles spasming. The power and fury of the Hidden Lotus had faded, leaving him so weak he could be beaten by a third-year academy student, let alone a genin. This was why the inner gates was considered a jutsu of last resort. Gai-san caught my eye and shook his head, silently asking me not to interfere. I shook my head back, denying him. I was the proctor, not him. This match it over, I announced, getting shocked looks from everyone. I judge Rock Lee to be unable to continue. The winner is Gaara. There was shocked and confused murmurings from the genin as the assorted jonin nodded in agreement, seconds before Sand launched out to strike at the weakened Leaf genin. In a flash, I stood in front of Likuan, surrounding him in the ribcage of my Susanoo, that the sand was unable to penetrate. Did you not hear me, Gaara of the desert? I asked mildly. This match is over. Garukuan emerged from the dust cloud, eye boring into me and Ki spewing like flood water over me. It was rather impressive for a genin, but I was no genin. His death will prove my existence, the redhead snarled. The genin and jonin shuddered when Garukuan unleashed his Ki. They nearly fainted when I unleashed my own as I glared at the Jinchuriki with my eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. You will stand down, Genin. I said in a soft tone that carried throughout the entire arena. If you seek to continue, disqualification will be the least of your worries. Garakuen froze, his eyes going wide as I pressed my intent upon him, only letting up when he took a hesitant step back. A smart choice, I informed him before turning behind me to Likuen, who was being supported by Gai-san. Bring him to the infirmary, they are setting up for his surgery. Gai-san swallowed tightly before nodding his accepting his assistance as he picked up his genin and moved to bring him to the infirmary. Would you please take my place for the remaining ones, Anko-san? I requested the special jonin, who nodded quickly in response, the memory of my Ki still in her mind. My thanks. I followed after Gai-san and Likuen, preparing myself for his surgery as I moved. While not as bad as in canon, this was still going to be a rough surgery. Time to prove my skill once again. The damage to Likuen was even worse than I had thought, microfractures along his entire skeletal structure, his left arm and right leg were literally in pieces, while his heart was on the verge of exploding from the amount of blood that had been forced through it. As it stood, he would make a recovery, but he would be sidelined for at least 3 months, preferably 5, just to be absolutely certain he was fully recovered, and that was including physiotherapy. I left the theater and met Gai-san, who was waiting anxiously. He'll recover, but it'll take half a year if he doesn't overdo it and if he follows the recovery plan to the letter. I said sharply, making the normally exuberant elite Jonin flinch. Gai-san, I am not a Jonin sensei, nor do I claim to know everything about Likuen, but his education as a shinobi is shockingly lopsided. Even with his inability to use most forms of external chakra expression, I can think of over a dozen ways he could have fought Gaara that were smarter and more sophisticated than charge, like he was doing out there. You've done a tremendous job in training his body, now you must train his mind, or he will never rise to fulfill the potential that both I and Hokage-sama can see in him. With those icy words, I left him frowning in contemplation to return to the arena. It was harsh, and it hurt me to strike at someone I respected so much in such a manner, but it was something that was needed to be said. Things had begun to change in a manner that I couldn't predict, so I needed to make sure everyone was able to fight at their best. Closing my eyes, I paused for a moment to take in a breath and gathered myself before stepping into the prelims arena as the matchings for the tournament were announced. I quickly glanced over the matchings and paused for a moment as I looked over them. Match 1 Naruto Uzumaki vs Niji Hyuga. Match 2 Kuratsuchi vs Chojuro. Match 3 Sakura Haruno vs Temari. Match 4 Shikamaru Nara vs Shino Aburame. Match 5 Gaara vs Sasuke Uchiha. Different, yet the same. Funny how life works out like that. It seemed like that Hiruzen-sama had just finished his speech about the coming month as the remaining 10 combatants were looking a bit contemplative, Naruto-kun, Sasuke-kun and Sakura-chan all looking at me with hopeful eyes, obviously hoping that I would be able to help them train. Unfortunately for them, that wasn't about to happen this time around. You are all dismissed now, I wish you the best of luck in 1 month's time from now, Hiruzen-sama said with a kind smile to all of the genin. I look forward to seeing your growth and development. Taking their cue, the genin began to follow their Jonin sensei out of the arena as I approached Hiruzen-sama. My apologies for leaving part way through, Hiruzen-sama, I said with a slight bow of my head. It is of no concern, the aged leader replied with a smile. How is Likuen? In recovery, so long as he sticks to the recovery plan I gave to Gai-san and doesn't overdo his physiotherapy, he should be able to resume his duties within the year, I informed with a soft smile. Hiruzen-sama smiled at me as he motioned for me to follow him. That is good to hear, he said with a relieved sigh. I would hate to see the promising career of one so young to be snuffed out so soon. I nodded in agreement as I followed the aged leader into the forest, the assorted predators obviously knowing better than to try to attack the two of us. Are you prepared? He questioned me, looking over his shoulder at me with a quizzical look. This council meeting is going to be a turning moment for you. I took in a breath and smiled at him. I will be, I assured him. I will be ready to take your seat at the end of the exams. He smiled at me warmly in response. That is good to hear, Yuriko-chan, he told me with a soft sigh as he looked up at the sky that peeked through the foliage of the forest. Trust me when I say that I know I am leaving the village in capable hands. I bowed my head in acceptance of his words. I shall do my best to live up to that trust, I replied with a smile, a warm feeling building up inside of me at those words. If you would allow it, Hiruzen-sama, this coming month, I would wish to take a small leave of absence to do some personal training, starting after this council meeting. The Hokage paused for a moment at my words before turning to face me with a quizzical look at me. I am fully confident in my ability to fight and survive, but I feel that if I am to lead this village, I need to be even stronger than I am, I told him bluntly. Orochimaru's sneak attack on me proved that I am not completely ready to lead the village just yet. He hummed in response before nodding. I shall allow this, he informed me in a firm tone. Take this time to make any preparations you see fit, he instructed me. I expect to see you in my office for a debriefing 3 days before the start of the final stage of the Chunin exams. I nodded in response. As you wish, Hokage-sama, I replied formally, bowing to him. I think that's enough of the formality, he replied with a chuckle as he turned to resume our trek through the forest. Where do you plan on doing your training? I remained silent for a moment, gathering my thoughts before replying. The being that gave me my power, decided to help me out a bit more and set something up to help me train, I said finally, getting a curious look from him. We speak occasionally, but I wouldn't expect too much help from him, he does what amuses him. Hiruzen-sama nodded his understanding. Understandable, he replied with a heavy sigh, remembering what I told him about my suspicions about my friend. I shall trust your judgment in this then. Thank you, Hiruzen-sama, I said, smiling at him as we exited the forest and headed towards the village. Our trip through the village was a more quiet one as we greeted the various civilians who were going about their days, getting ready for the finals in a month where there would be various nobles, merchants, and spectators coming from afar. Soon enough we were in the Hokage Tower heading for the council chambers where the assorted members were already gathering. Hey, Yuriko, how's it going? Tsum greeted with the trademarked feral grin of the Inuzuka clan as I took my seat next to her. It goes well, how about yourself, Tsum? I questioned my compatriot with a polite smile. Not too badly, going to have to kick Kiba's ass into shape after losing to a Nara of all people, the woman groused shooting a glare to Shikaku who chuckled lazily from where he was sitting. Man, the kid didn't even need to lay a hand on my pup to beat him either. I chuckled a bit in amusement. Perhaps he should learn to cool his head down a bit, I suggested, smiling at the Inuzuka next to me who huffed and rolled her eyes. You don't think I haven't been trying that? She questioned gruffly. He behaves less like a canny pack animal and more like a rabid beast sometimes, hopefully this will teach him otherwise. I'm sure you will figure something out, I assured with another chuckle as the last member of the civilian council entered, allowing the meeting proper to start. While most council meetings were between the clan heads, the Jonin commander, the ANBU commander and the Hokage, once a month the civilian council were allowed to attend to air any concerns they had with the security of the village and to hear any official announcements being made. Thankfully they were fully aware of what were to happen if they were to try and waste our time with meaningless concerns and only brought forth legitimate ones to be discussed, things like guards of important imports of metals that weren't found in Hai no Kuni or patrols for the farms outside of Konoha proper. Before we call this meeting to a close, there is one last announcement I wish to make, Hiruzen-sama announced to everyone after the final item was discussed to an acceptable conclusion. At the end of the final stage of this Chunin exam, I will be announcing my retirement and my successor. The room paused as they stared at the Hokage in surprise, and I couldn't exactly blame them. Hiruzen-sama was the longest-running Kage in the elemental nations, beating even the Sandaime Tsuchikage out by 5 years. Have you decided on a successor already? Hayashi questioned curiously as he turned to look at the Hokage. Hiruzen-sama nodded in confirmation. I have, the one who will succeed me as the Godame Hokage shall be Yuriko Uchiha, he informed the room as I suddenly found myself to be the object of interest for the room. I let out a small breath as I kept myself composed under their stares. Is that wise, Hiruzen? The first one to speak up was, not too surprisingly, Hamura, who was looking between myself and the Hokage with a nervous look. She is still rather young, don't you think? Not to mention she is descended from him, Koharu protested a bit more vehemently. I frowned as I turned my gaze to the two counselors, but before I could reply to their accusations, however, someone else spoke up in my defense. If you really think she is anything like Madara, then the two of you are idiots, Shikaku spoke up, surprising everyone that his usual lazy and sleepy demeanor was nowhere to be seen. She has done nothing but work to protect Konoha and its people since she was a genin during the last war, something, I may note, neither of you really participated in. The two recoiled from the unsaid accusation before someone else spoke up, surprisingly from the civilian side. Excuse me, I know that our opinion is not as powerful as the shinobi, one of the younger civilians spoke up, the representative of the farming communities that supplies Konohagakure with its food if I remembered correctly. But, why are you questioning Hokage-sama's decision on this? I barely restrained a bark of laughter that bubbled up at the young man's question, really I couldn't have scripted such a question better myself. I may not know shinobi very well, due to the nature of your work, but even we in the farms have heard of Yuriko Uchiha, the young man continued. And, sorry for saying this, Hokage-sama, but, he is getting old, most people retire before they even hit your ages, Hokage-sama, honored counselors. No need to apologize, Higakuen, Hiruzen-sama informed with a calm, placating smile. You do have a point after all. I think it is time for the three of us to retire, Hamura, Koharu. The two turned, opening their mouths to protest his words before freezing as they caught his eyes, while his facial expression was set in his usual grandfatherly smile, mostly for the benefit of the civilian council. His eyes were speaking a different story altogether as they glared at his two teammates with a wordless threat. Yuriko-chan, is there anybody you would like to request to take the position as your advisors? He questioned, turning to me with a patient smile. It was something I had through long and hard on, since he told me his decision. I do, I informed calmly. If they would be willing, I would like to work with Hayashi Hyuga and Sum Inuzuka as my advisors. The gathered council members rippled for a moment at my request as Sum stared at me for a moment before barking out in a laugh. Sure, I'm game to advise you, she informed in her usual brash manner as she clapped me on the shoulder. It would be an honor to serve as your advisor, Hayashi assured me from his position with a nod of agreement. Hiruzen-sama smiled at the three of us before nodding. Very well then, Yuriko Uchiha will be assuming the mantle of Hokage 1 week after the Chunin exams are completed, he informed proudly, although he did shoot his teammates a look, telling them to silence any other arguments they had. Hamura, Koharu, kindly meet me in my office for a discussion after this. The rest of you, dismissed. Shit, go Dame Hokage, Sum said with a shake of her head as she grinned at me. Quite the difference from being the Hokage's assistant, huh? She said teasingly, referring to my time under Minato-sama. I rolled my eyes in response as we move out of the chambers, an easy grin on my face. Yeah, well, you're going to be one of my advisors, I told her calmly. Are you really in any position to speak up about big leaps? The Inuzuka clan head let out a bark of laughter in response. Yeah, I can't really speak up to that, now can I, Hayashi? She questioned, turning to the Hyuga clan head who walked up to join the pair of us. I think it is a reasonable choice, Hayashi informed in his usual calm demeanor. You balance myself out quite well when you compare the two of us. Sum snorted in response as I smile at the pair of them. So, do your brats know about this? The wild woman questioned. I shook my head in response. No, they don't, I told Rashi, but I wanted to surprise the two of them, I informed her with a grin, getting a laugh from her. Ah, that blonde runt of yours will be shocked at that announcement, Sum said in amusement as we walked through the halls of the tower. He did pretty good in the prelims. Beating a member of Suna's puppet corps isn't an easy thing to do, I remember one in the Second War, what was his name again? You mean Sasori of the Red Sand? Hayashi prompted. Ah, yeah, him, vicious bastard he was, Sum nodded in confirmation. Thank goodness Tsunade-sama was around to counter his poisons. I hummed in response as the three of us left the building, civilians giving us a berth as when 3 high-ranked shinobi were walking around with our headbands on meant we were talking business. First thing I want you to advise me on, I mentioned to them in a low voice. I am considering recalling her back to active duty in the hospital. The two of them turned to me with speculative looks at my statement. It would be good to have her back, even if it's just in the hospital, Sum said after a moment. Nothing against your skills but... I smirked at her with a small chuckle. Tsunade is better in the hospital than me, I have freely admitted that from day one, I replied. Sum snorted. Yeah, but you're worth 5 of her on the battlefield, I've seen your work during the Third War, she commented, swatting my shoulder lightly. How do you plan on getting her to return? Hayashi questioned curiously, raising an eyebrow at me. By being a shinobi, I replied with a grin. Hit her low, I will be sending Jiraiya and ask Hiruzen-sama to do one last mission for me if he would be willing. The two looked at me before Tsum spoke up. Now that's just evil, she said with an admiring look. Her teammate and her sensei. Damn, talk about guilt-tripping someone. The thing is, Konoha needs all the shinobi it can get. Having one of our S-rank kunoichi wandering high no kuni in a drunken stupor is not only mismanagement of resources, but damaging for our reputation. I said with a sigh. I can understand why Hokage-sama allowed it, but it does not mean I will permit it. Besides, she still has family here. Family, you mean Naruto-san, do you not? Hayashi catoned on quickly. Yes. Senju and Uzumaki are closely related. It would be good to give Naruto-kun some degree of actual blood-related family. I nodded. You really dote on the kid, Sum noted in a soft voice. I paused at that statement for a moment before replying. You know how we Uchiha are, I commented. We never do things by halves. That sent Sum into a fit of laughter. That you don't, she agreed. You start off learning some medical jutsu from your mom, next thing you know you're comparable to Tsunade of all people. I rolled my eyes at her. Anything worth learning is worth learning right. I informed her. Anyway, the finals are a month away. Any guesses on who's going to get promoted? Those brats of yours for one, Sum said with a roll of her eyes. All three of them are already standing at a Chunin level, they just need the vests to match. Shikamaru and Shino are both viable choices as well, depending on the progress they make this month, Hayashi commented as we moved into a tea house. Both are strong tactical planners, but they do need to build up their individual abilities more. I snorted a bit in response. What a surprise, Anara and Aburaim are tactical planners, I said humorously before chuckling. Remember Ika Nara and Doro Aburaim? The two of them blinked before Tsum laughed. The two taijutsu specialists, she giggled out. Oh, I almost forgot about them. Indeed, they certainly went against the curve, Hayashi nodded in agreement, his lips quirking in amusement, their conversation pausing for a moment as the waitress came over and took their orders. So, who will be training your three? I hummed a bit in response. Well, I know Sayataicho was looking at Sakura-chan for the hospital, so I think it wouldn't be too hard, I explained as I tapped my chin a bit. Plus my mother is more than willing to help her out with some other things. I know Kakashi-san has been interested in teaching Sasuke-kun and Naruto-kun for a while now, particularly Sasuke-kun as he can actually inherit the majority of his skills. As for Naruto-kun, there is someone I know who will be teaching him. My two new advisors looked at me with raised eyebrows, obviously waiting to hear a name as I grinned at them. Sum finally let out a sigh of complaint. You're not going to tell us who it is, are you? She questioned irritably. Not really, I want it to be a surprise, I said with a grin as I sipped the tea that had been brought out. Anyways, as much as I would love to chat with you two for a while, I have to ensure that his trainer actually does his job before I go for my own training. The two looked at each other before looking back to me. Do you need assistance with it? Hayashi questioned in concern. I shook my head in response as I finished the last of my tea. No, I have something arranged for it, so, don't expect to see me around the village very much for this coming month, I informed them as I stood, leaving some Rio for my own share. See you two later. The two gave their own goodbyes as I left the stand and made my way into the village, heading for the hot springs where I knew the person who would be training Naruto would be hanging out around. Sure enough, as I approached, since I was looking for him, I could see the telltale white hair and red Haori of the toad Sannin in one of the trees that surrounded the hot springs. Jiraiya-sama, please come down from there, I called up to the Sannin in a chilly voice, making the man shudder as he turned to look down at me. The years certainly have been kind to the remaining loyal Sannin, as far as the village was concerned, with him maintaining his relatively youthful good looks without the aid of Orochimaru's body swapping or Tsunade's jutsu, something I suspect to be a part of his status as an actual sage. Ah, Yuriko-chan. Jiraiya-sama said slowly, looking a bit nervous at being caught by me. You're looking lovely today. I let out a sigh as I shook my head. Just get down here, Jiraiya-sama, there is something we need to discuss, I informed the Sannin with a long-suffering look at him as he chuckled. I knew I was never going to change his perverted ways, so I wasn't even going to bother with it. So, how can I help out the next Hokage? Jiraiya questioned, waggling his eyebrows at me. Well, at least I didn't have to worry about anyone listening in if he was speaking so freely about that. Need some advice for the bedroom? I rolled my eyes at his suggestive comment. Rashi and I are quite happy in that regard, thank you, I informed him plainly. No, I'm here to talk to you about something else. Naruto-kun. Jiraiya-sama paused as he looked at me with narrowed eyes, trying to gauge what I was going to say from my expression. Is something wrong with him? With the seal? He questioned in concern. No, nothing like that, thankfully, even his training to access the Kyuubi's chakra is going well. No, this is about his participation in the final stage of the Chunin exams, I informed him, getting a raised eyebrow. I want you to be his trainer for the final stage. Is that wise? Jiraiya-sama questioned. With how close we both were to Minato, it took a lot just to keep the questions about you raising a blonde kid after Minato's passing. Hell, some even thought you were his mother of his kid. I rolled my eyes at that insinuation. I think we both know that Naruto-kin's heritage was something of an open secret to the world, I countered with a second roll of my eyes. Especially as he got older. Jiraiya-sama grimaced at my point. I take it it's also because of the Akatsuki, he asked in lower voice. Yes, I nodded in confirmation, a grimace on my face. Kakuza knew to target him and Sasuke-kun to draw me out. We need him to be able to at the very least be able to escape their clutches on his own. Jiraiya-sama nodded in agreement. What kind of training were you thinking of? He asked, not quite agreeing to do so quite yet. I shrugged a bit. Honestly, I think you would know best, I replied, meeting his gaze seriously. He does fight in a very similar manner to you. Jiraiya-sama sighed as he rubbed back of his neck for a bit. Well, the toads have been on my case of finding another summoner for the contract. He groused a bit as a smile grew on my face. Thank you, Jiraiya-sama, I told the man gratefully. I know he'll be in good hands with you. It was always surprising how adorable a grown man could look when he was blushing in embarrassment. You really do take after Kushina sometimes, you know that right? He groused at me with an embarrassed glare as I laughed in amusement. I'll take that as a compliment, Jiraiya-sama, I replied easily. Where should I tell him to meet you? Jiraiya-sama waved me off a bit in response. I'll come by and pick him up myself tomorrow, he informed me. I nodded in acceptance. Thank you, I told him gratefully, patting his shoulder. There was a reason, even after all my years of knowing him, I still referred to Jiraiya with the suffix of sama, he had earned it. As a fair warning, after the Chunin exams, I will have a mission for you. Jiraiya-sama's face became a bit more solemn as he met my gaze. Tsunadeheim, he hedged speculatively, gaining a nod from me. It won't be easy to convince her to return. I'll make sure you have help for the mission, I assured him. Just be ready for it. Jiraiya-sama nodded his acceptance as his face broke into a beaming grin. Hey, this is the great Jiraiya-sama you're talking to, he announced in a proud voice. I am always prepared for any situation. I laughed in amusement to his boasting. I shall hold you to that then, Jiraiya-sama, I told him. If you wish, you are free to join us for breakfast tomorrow, it would be good to spend some time with you again. Jiraiya-sama chuckled a bit in response. It would be my pleasure, he replied easily in an over-exaggerated manner as he bowed to me like one would to a noble. I shall meet you in the morning then, fair Lady Uchiha. I rolled my eyes in response. Just make sure you're tidy for once, I told him sternly as I began to walk away. I won't be afraid to break out the hose if you smell like hookers and booze. Jiraiya-sama's response was to simply laugh as he began to make his way back up the tree to his peeping spot to resume his preferred pastime. Are you sure you are prepared for this? Once it starts, it won't be stopped until the designated time. I eyed the floating box in front of me, standing at the entrances to the training grounds. It was the morning after the second exam concluded, and I had everything squared away for Naruto-kun, Sasuke-kun and Sakura-chan, and all of my personal matters were put on hold. I am sure, I assured my friend as I took in a deep breath, this training was going to essentially be one long gauntlet run, consisting of hordes of enemies coming at me, with every kill I make spawning an additional 2 enemies, meaning that many of my crowd-clearing jutsus would actually be to my detriment as there wouldn't be periods of rest, unless I managed to hide myself away from my enemies long enough to rest. If you are sure, I will now transport you to the location, please, do be careful, I do not wish for one so interesting to die so soon. I chuckled a bit in response as I relaxed my body, closing my eyes as I felt a brief sense of vertigo. No worries, I don't plan on dying anytime soon, I assured him as I opened my eyes again to find myself in a clearing of a forest consisting of massive trees as hundreds of what looked like white zetsus began to come out of the foliage. Quest alert: survive in the zone for 25 days. With every white zetsu killed, 2 more shall take his place. Kill too many in a single go and a special enemy shall appear. Be warned, while the zetsus are less active at night, it does not mean that there isn't a hunter that isn't active when the sun sets. Bonus objective. Quest reward 1 million EXP plus 500,000 bonus EXP per bonus objective. EXP from kills will be tallied at the end of the quest period. My Sharingan sprang to life as I looked around. Thankfully, my near-perfect control over my chakra, assisted by a couple of perks, reduced the cost of my Sharingan to a minimal amount, allowing me to keep it going indefinitely when one considered my natural chakra regeneration. I drew out my Kodachi as one of the zetsus came up to attack me, the blade cutting through the plant-like flesh of the creation, severing the arm reaching out for me as I began to backpedal away from the approaching group, looking around for any place that could serve as a good place to hide out. P. My goal here was simple: survive and do so without using my wide area jutsu. I had been getting too much in the habit of simply blasting my enemies into smithereens with A and S rank jutsu. Granted, on the regular enemies, it worked a treat, but against the real powerhouses of the elemental nations? Against Orochimaru, the stronger members of Akatsuki and even that bastard of mine, Madara? No, it would not work. By fighting against an unending gauntlet of enemies, I would be forced to think both tactically and strategically in order to ensure my survival, whilst at the same time focus on improving my situational awareness. As an elite jonin, it was already high enough, but as I was going to be a Kage soon, one of the 5 Kage at that, merely very good was not good enough. I had to be virtually untouchable. Throw in the conflict with Akatsuki was bound to happen in the next few years, and I couldn't take things slowly. I decapitated one of the white Zetsus as it reached out to grab a hold of my long hair as I began to retreat from the battle zone. I couldn't spend the next month fighting in a single spot. After all, my friend said that he designed it that special enemies would start appearing if I stayed fighting in a single place for too long. I don't know what he meant by special, but considering I told him to make this as difficult as he could while being doable, I don't think I want to find out so soon. The Zetsus chased me for a short while through the trees, but they were quickly lost as I put in a bit more effort into my speed. I spent some time exploring the area I had found myself in. It seemed to have several types of distinct biomes with a glowing blue field of some kind that kept me from exploring further than the roughly 25 by 25 kilometer area I was in. Plenty of room to work with for fighting, evading, and setting up some camps for resting. There was even assorted wildlife and flora for me to harvest for food and supplies. My first focus after scouting the area out was to set up a base camp, which allowed me to flex my Fuinjutsu skills as I set them up around my camp that hid it from view. The seal, ironically named, in plain view, was something that Jiraiya-sama created based off of his transparency technique, that warped the light surrounding the camp to make it look like nothing was actually there. There were also one-way sound-dampening seals and scent-obscuring seals mixed in there as well. Something I'd have to be mindful of was that all Zetsu could use earth jutsu to some degree or other, so I had to focus on not disturbing the earth as much as possible, to prevent them from sensing me with vibrations in the ground. I frowned a bit as I looked over my base camp. Nothing spectacular, just a fire pit, and a hammock strung up between the trees to help prevent any movement in my sleep disturbing the ground enough to bring the attention of the Zetsu. Looking up into the sky, I saw the sun hovering above the horizon as the sky started to streak with red. It would be best to capture myself some food before night fell. Whatever the hunter was, I would rather gather some information on it first before trying to engage it, if at all. There was one thing I learned rather quickly: the Zetsu are fucking stupid. I mean, seriously, they make concussed lemmings on acid look smart by comparison. That shows stupid they are. As an example, well, right here's a good one. I had set up a small distraction and a spiked pit trap to test how reactive they were, only for a group of 10 of them to fall into the trap, one right after the other. I had no words. Seriously, it just went to show that it was only their numbers and the surprise of their attack, along with their shape-shifting abilities, that they managed to challenge the Shinobi Alliance at all. Granted, there was that spiral-masked one who could use a form of wood style, but he was just about the only one who was a serious threat, out of 10 or so thousand Zetsu. And he was only not stupid from hanging around Tobi so much. So, with that, I started trapping everything using a mixture of wire traps, pitfalls, Fuinjutsu. Actually, I had even gotten a trapping skill from the number of traps that I set up, and it was promptly leveled up nearly a couple dozen times as I continued to set them up. I even reinvented a few I'd seen in cartoons back in my original world. Thank you, Wild E. Coyote, for showing me how Naruto do traps. For example, right now I was hidden away from a group of Zetsus as they dangled from the trees, struggling with the wires tightening around their throats as they were starved for air, their comrades not even noticing as the 4 were dragged up into the air, 8 more of the plant men growing from the ground as they died. I wasn't seriously trying to fight them at this time either. I was mostly getting a hang for their patterns and ticks that could be, although with how incredibly stupid they were, I was getting diddly squat on that front. Seriously, a sign saying, "Free bird seed," would draw them like moths to a flame. I let out a sigh as I moved on, leaving them to wander into their deaths as a notification popped up. A special enemy has appeared to investigate the number of Zetsu that have died. I blinked at the notification as I hid in the branches of the trees, a frown flickering across my face as I considered my options. It would probably be best to investigate this before moving on, especially since I didn't know what these special enemies were. Which was in question that was quickly answered as I heard a scream of rage as a man dressed in metallic armor and looked like he was wearing the entirety of a razor factory appeared with a small flash of light. "Where are those turtles?" a gruff, raspy voice cried out angrily as he looked around wildly, my eyes widening as I finally recognized him. "It looks like my friend summoned the goddamn Shredder to hunt me down. All I have to do is kill that bitch and you'll give me the power to defeat those turtles?" the Shredder questioned, looking around at something, most likely talking to my friend about it. Ha, no problems, I'll wring her neck and rip out her insides. Wow, Shredder is angrier than I remembered. Maybe there's been another reboot of TNMT since I died. I ghosted through the trees as the samurai Ronin stomped through the forest, looking for me, ignoring the white Zetsus as they shambled along in search of me. Moving stealthily myself, I was very glad that he probably didn't have any of the green ooze on him that he used in old console games. Fighting someone as skilled as Shredder was bad enough, fighting a giant monster with random abilities from mutagenic ooze was another. Plus, even before I had died, I hardly knew much about his capabilities. The strongest memories I had of him was the bumbling fool from the really old cartoons, which this one was obviously not. How long do you plan on hiding from me? The Shredder growled out as he turned around to face the direction I was hiding in, making my eyes widen a bit. You are good at it, better than even those turtles that call themselves ninjas, but I am a master. I let out a small sigh as I leapt down to an exposed branch and remained in a crouched position as I looked at him carefully, keeping my Sharingan inactive for the time being. Better than I thought with your entrance, I commented idly, not really feeling a need to keep my usual polite demeanor. So, out of curiosity, who are you exactly? The Shredder growled in response. I am the master of the Foot Ninja Clan, woman. The Shredder, he shouted out boastfully. And you are my prey. I rolled my eyes in response. Yuriko Uchiha, I said plainly. Head of the Uchiha clan, Akunoichi. The Shredder stopped his grandstanding to look at me with narrowed eyes as I met his gaze without a flinch. And honestly, I expected more, I concluded before leaping back into the trees as the Shredder roared in anger. I took a quick look at his stats as he began to chase after a clone I substituted myself with, hanging back a bit further as my clone led him toward a trapped area of the forest. Orakusaki, level 70, the Shredder, HP, 25,000 CP, not applicable. Wait, the Shredder had a name. How much did I miss? Shaking my head, I refocused on the task of taking down Orakusaki. Seriously? The man, despite what seems to be an anger management issue, was quite quick and nimble, especially for someone who didn't have chakra to reinforce their limbs and senses, easily keeping pace with my clone as I trailed after him. No chakra meant no flashy jutsu to worry about, but I dimly remembered that there was a branch of ninjutsu on my old world involving gunpowder, so it's possible he had something like that available. Best to be wary on principle. It seems that the chase managed to cool his head a bit as he began to evade the traps that I had laid out as he began to close in on my clone, enough so that he began hurling shuriken with surprising accuracy, catching my clone off guard enough for one of the blades to dig into its side, disrupting the chakra shell holding the construct together, causing the chakra clone to disperse with a puff of smoke. The Shredder, because honestly that title is cooler than his name, came to a halt as the clone dispersed, a low growl emanating from his throat as he began to look around cautiously for me. Looks like he was starting to take me seriously. I kept above him, keeping my form hidden amongst the leaves of the trees that surrounded us, considering my options on how to handle this. First off, I wouldn't be using any of my flashy ninjutsu as it would defeat the purpose of my training if I started breaking out something like Susanoo for every threat I faced in here. I soundlessly drew out my kodachi as I positioned myself, ghosting over the Shredder's head as he looked in the opposite direction. The man was definitely skilled, he moved in a way that made it difficult to get the drop on him, wary of traps, and even positioning himself in places it would be hard to sneak up on him. There was one weakness to his plan, however. The ninjutsu I used was much different from the one he used. Even if the principles were the same. Reaching into my pouch, I pulled out 5 tri-pronged kunai with seals wrapped around the hilt and took careful aim as I began to channel my chakra flow, chakra scalpel, through my kodachi before hurling my kunai at him. As I expected, he whirled around at the sound of the blades cutting through the air and backhanded through the air with his blade-laden arm, smacking them out of the air with an ease I'm certain most fresh jonin wouldn't be able to show. And while impressive, it was exactly what I was planning for as I honed in on one of the kunai that was falling behind him and activated the jutsu that made Minato-sama so feared. For a passenger, the Flying Thunder God was a rather disorienting experience. Being the user of the technique made it much easier on keeping our lunches down. For me, I was simply focused on the kunai I wanted to teleport to, and the next moment, I was holding the hilt of the kunai behind the Shredder as my chakra-coated kodachi swung around, burying into the neck of the surprised shinobi. Sorry about this, but I plan on living, I commented as the Shredder began to grasp at the kodachi buried into his neck before I ripped it free, creating a gouging hole where his throat used to be. He let out one last strangled gasp before he vanished in the same flash of light he appeared with. You have assassinated Orakusaki. Kuro Kabuto and Teko Keiji looted and stored in inventory. Letting out a small breath, swiping my blade to remove the blood from it, I then sheathed my weapon and leapt back into the trees to retreat. The Zetsu would doubtless come to investigate what had happened here. I let out a small sigh as I stared up at the stars in the night sky above me as I relaxed in my hammock, swaying slightly in breeze as I tried to relax from the day. I was starting to wonder if this was too easy of a challenge for me. After all, I just assassinated a special enemy, rather easily at that too. I really shouldn't have tempted the kami with that thought. The only warning I had was a slight whine before a ball of blue energy was hurtling towards me. Quickly teleporting myself, I grasped the hilt of a Hiraishin kunai I had set up for just his situation, my Sharingan, activating quickly to scan the area rapidly, looking for my attack only to catch the barest glimpse of a blurred figure as it vanished into the forest. A blurred figure. When I had my Sharingan active, I didn't even think that was possible. I followed the direction the blur disappeared off to, planning on finding out who, or what, was attacking my camp, as well as how they managed to find me camp in the first place. It had already been 3 days since this little trip into the territory of the plant morons had begun, and the past 2 nights, I had been perfectly safe in my camp. Oh, son of a bitch. Whatever the hunter was, it obviously had the ability to upgrade its hunting techniques, or it had access to spells/equipment/other things that allowed it to track me down. A being capable of escalating its capabilities, either in tracking, combat or both, until its prey is caught. Actually, that blur looked suspiciously familiar for some reason, although it isn't ringing any bells as of yet. My past life is somewhat blurry about a few things, although I had learned mediation techniques that sharpened my memory for precisely this sort of thing. Still, in hot pursuit of whatever the hell had fired what had looked like a ball of honest-to-God plasma at me was not the opportune time or place to use them. The fact that this thing threw plasma at me definitely made it something from a sci-fi universe though. The faint sound of air burning was all the warning I had. Throwing myself to one side, I narrowly dodged another bolt of blue plasma. What the hell? It had evaded my sight empowered by an active Sharingan, at that, whilst simultaneously laying a trail to lead me on and then stealthed around behind me to attack me from the rear. I whirled around and threw a handful of shuriken in a wide spread before running my hands through a short series of hand signs. Shuriken Shadow Clone Jutsu. In an instant, the 5 shuriken I had thrown multiplied into 500. Yes, it was a wide area jutsu, but the only thing that was going to be damaged was the local foliage, and hopefully the asshole who had just shot at me. The sight of 500 shuriken carving parts of a tree up really had to be seen to be believed. 1 minute, healthy leaves and branches. The next, the place looked like a happy, crazed lumberjack had gone through the place with a double-ended chainsaw. As the shuriken hit, I strained my ears to find a trace of something that didn't belong. In the instant that I heard it, the sharp sound of metal on metal, I turned and thrust my sword towards the source. Kushizashi, extend. Silently, my blade shot forwards, the blade extending to impale my target, and it seems that my tactic caught the hunter off guard as my blade stopped in the middle of a rapidly dematerializing blur that resolved itself into the shape of a predator. Oh sweet Kami, why? Okay, I completely remember this guy now. Basically this dude is the pinnacle of all hunters and wielding a wide array of alien technology, one of which was heat sensors if I remember correctly. Which also explained how he found me, considering that I had never seen the need to include protection against infrared vision in my campsite ceiling array. Damn, this game had just entered hard mode, alright. Kushizashi, retract. I ordered when I saw the predator reaching for the blade in its chest. I did not want to see if a predator's physical strength was enough to snap chakra metal, thank you very much. The green blood staining the first few inches of my weapon was somewhat satisfying to see. I had just gotten first blood on a goddamn predator. A rumble from the aforementioned apex hunter had me tensing up and going on full alert. From the now clear memories I had from my past life, this was a dead ringer for the predator that a certain Mr. Universe actor had taken down in the original film. Standing way over the height of even a tall man like Mike Guy, the predator had reptilian scales covering its well-muscled body. A metal loincloth covered its groin, while most of the rest of it was bare of any kind of armor, the only exceptions being the open-toed boots on its feet, the bracers on its arms, a small amount of armor over where the human heart would be, and the fucking plasma gun turret thing mounted on its left shoulder. Oh, and a full-face helmet, with dreadlock-like hair coming from beneath it, that had dozens of nifty little gadgets crammed into it to make hiding from its wearer a major pain in the rear. Out of all of that, it was the bracers that gave me pause, as I distinctly remembered that the predator had a last-ditch, fuck you, suicide bomb in one of them. I think it was the one on the left wrist, but I can't be certain. Either way, he was a dangerous opponent, especially one that was going to engage me at his own choosing. We stood there, watching each other for several moments, waiting for the other to drop their guard as a signal for an attack. So, since he was waiting for the same thing I purposely let my guard drop a bit, prompting him to launch out a ball of plasma at me as I threw myself backwards as a kunai flew out of my hand, aimed for one of the gaps in his armor as the heat from the plasma washed over my head. Damn it, I like me hair. Why is it that it keeps getting melted a bit by this guy? I focused on the kunai that I threw and triggered the seals attached to it, prompting my teleportation next to the predator, only, when I arrived, he was already gone. Which was surprising, because I only took my eyes off him for a literal heartbeat. Then again, he had seen me dodge his first plasma bolt using the Hiration, so he had probably recognized the specific type of kunai that I used as mediums. The predator was certainly no fool. I let out a sking sound as I leapt away from the position I was in, not in a hurry to find out if he left any surprises for me as I began to silently move through the trees, searching for my opponent. Which, honestly, was likely to be a long shot. He wasn't a fool, and he would have reactivated his camo tech as soon as he left my sight. And if I was right, chances are, he wasn't going to push his luck on attacking me again tonight. Instead, he was probably going to continue to watch me and learn from my patterns. Which sucked, because I couldn't do the same without being able to find him. Although. Karas HCZZAP. Sun Nova Dash. Ow, seal backlashes hurt. I let out a growl as I tried to smooth out my hair from the mess that the backlash made it into as I mentally went over where I went wrong with the seal I was developing. It was supposed to be an augmentation seal for sight. Basically I was trying to charge up the predictive nature of the Sharingan, which was done by reading the subtle cues that the body went through when moving. It was something that no amount of training could overcome, reduced and hidden, but not gotten rid of completely. I was trying to increase that aspect of the Sharingan, so that I could pick up the movement of the predator, even when cloaked. The problem was, however, actually trying to tie the seal to only one aspect of Sharingan was easier said than done. As an ocular jutsu bloodline, the copy will eye was certainly supreme, but its powers, the copying eye and the predictive eye, were very closely interlinked, to the point that trying to apply my seal Solalito the predictive eye portion was like trying to separate Siamese twins. Fucking hell, I grumbled as I placed my sealing papers into a storage seal, putting it to the side for now as I focused on the other issue at hand. Namely, the black and yellow clothed figure that was flitting through the shadows of the forest, looking for me while I sat in a tree with a transparency seal keeping me from sight. Hanzo Hasashi the Scorpion level 85 HP, 35,000 CP. Oh, I remembered him alright. Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. Mr. Get Over Here, and probably one of the first ninjas seen by Western gamers, alongside Ryu Hayabusa. Shifting my stance so that I was crouching rather than sitting, I watched as the man crept through the forest skillfully, not making a single sound, and honestly, it was only the yellow sections of his armor that I was able to spot him by. Even then, I did lose track of him a few times as he searched for me. He was actually a really good ninja before he became an undead demon. Go figure. I leapt to another branch nearby, ghosting through the air without a sound as I circled around him, keeping pace with his, honestly, rather impressive speed. While he wasn't on the level of someone like Gai-san or Li Kuan, the man knew how to move quickly and silently that put even some Jonin to shame. He was even able to minimize his tells to the absolute minimum as he flitted through the forest, ignoring the Zetsus as they ignored him in turn, only taking an interest when they fell for one of the many traps that I had laid out in the forest. There were brief moments, but I was counting on one of those moments to try and put an end to this before it could go too far. Speaking of. Crackthum. A minor explosion ripped through the forest. You were playing out deadly game of hide and seek as Scorpion turned to look at the source, a trap-based barrier seal that entrapped a certain number of targets within it before exploding. He located the source, just as I moved above him and dived down for the kill. 1 second my Kodachi was about to be driven into his neck. The next, my Kodachi was in a tree trunk as the Scorpion's fist traveled to my face at Mach speeds. I let myself drop back as the fist narrowly missed my face while I brought my foot up in an attempt to kick Scorpion in the side of the head, aiming for his temple to either, A, hit it hard enough that he would die, or B, be disoriented from the blow. Unfortunately, he chose option C. He blocked my kick. The two of us quickly separated after that as we stared at one another. I was honestly feeling a little irritated at this point. That was twice now that my attempted assassination was cut off prematurely by them sensing some part of my attack. I narrowed my eyes as I watched Scorpion take his stance, my Sharingan, picking up the subtle hints of his kunai and chain as he held his right palm open. Oh ho, want to try and catch me off guard with that, huh? two can play at that game. I brought my Kodachi up next to my face as I aimed at Scorpion, looking like I was about to charge forward with a thrusting attack. Get over here. Kushizashi, extend. We launched our attacks at the same time, the kunai and chain being launched by Scorpion's throw as my Kodachi shot forward like a bullet. A quick application of wind release, chakra flow, to the blade of my Kodachi allowed it to cut through the kunai as it hurtled towards me, the now cut blade falling in two different directions as the wind-coated blade stabbed into Scorpion's heart. His eyes went wide as they looked down at himself, before looking back up at me, before he finally vanished in a flash of light. You have defeated the Scorpion. Kunai and chain looted and stored in inventory. I let out a relieved sigh as he vanished before leaping back up into the trees. Good, now I had to start laying out more traps, because the Zetsus were going through them like kids playing with confetti. Seriously, just how retarded are these things? Another flash of light, not even a full 24 hours later, told me that they were very retarded. My new opponent was a curious one that definitely caught my attention. An older-looking male human with black hair and a mustache and an eye patch over one eye, wearing a blue uniform. A pair of military sabers hung from his hips looking very innocuous. I could recognize him from anywhere considering that he was from one of my personal favorite animes. Führer King Bradley. The human homunculus hybrid of Wrath and the wielder of the ultimate eye. I will be honest, my pride got the better of me as I came out of the shadows to land before him. Calling his eye the ultimate eye in front of an Uchiha. Quickest way to piss any of us off. So, you are the one who I have been asked to kill, Bradley said pleasantly. I must admit, I did not anticipate such things happening to me, and I somewhat resent being whisked away from my world like some sort of errand boy, but if I slay you, Father's plans will be secured, so I suppose that I can swallow my pride this once. It shall be curious to see if you can match my ultimate eye with whatever skill you possess. I smirk at him as my Sharingan swirled to life, narrowing my eyes at him. Pretty arrogant of you, to announce your eye as the ultimate one, I commented calmly, restraining my own pride enough to not spit vitriol at him. Perhaps in your world it is, but this isn't your world, now is it? Bradley hummed, looking unruffled by my comment as he pulled the sabers from his hip free of their sheaths. I doubt it, he commented. After all, you are only human. I could feel the twitch of irritation on my face at his comment as I kept my polite smile up. Oh boy, was I eager smack the smug off of this guy. With deliberate slowness, I drew out my Kodachi as I watched him. You really shouldn't look down on humans, I commented with a twitch of my eye. After all, not only do they kill you, but they are ultimately the origin of your creation, what with them being the reason your father even exists. Bradley froze as he narrowed his visible eye at me, fury simmering beneath his eye as he glared. Bold words, woman, he growled in a low voice. I smirked at him. I suggest you pull off that eye patch, I actually want a challenge, and not commit euthanasia. A vein pulsed on his forehead as, with a single delicate flick of one saber, his eye patch fell away. You have better learn, human, he said before opening his eye fully. That you should be careful what you wish for, as you may regret getting it. I raised my Kodachi, intercepting both of his sabers as he lunged at me, holding my ground as he pressed against me. Don't underestimate me, homunculus. I said back as I activated, chakra flow, chakra scalpel. Because I'm liable to rip your eyes out. King Bradley, Wrath the Furious, HP, 40,000 CP. I swing my fist forward, Bradley already moving out of the way before my swing was even a quarter of the way through the motion as he pulled back from me, long enough for my fist to pass where my head was before trying to catch me with my balance off center. And to him it looked like his blow connected, only for my body to be covered in smoke as he sliced through a log. Not even a full heartbeat later he threw himself forward to avoid the swing of my Kodachi as he swung around with his dual sabers, forcing me to pull my Kodachi back quickly to block his attacks. Our exchange lasted several seconds, each of our eyes allowing us to predict the other's movements with ease as we intercepted attacks and countered with our own. Several hapless Zetsus that approached ended up getting cut to shreds as they came into range of our swinging blades. I must admit, for a homunculus your sword skills are rather impressive, I commented idly as we continued our clash. It's all the more a pity that you're little more than an enforcer for that jumped-up dwarf in the flask who spawned you. Truly, a waste of talent. Another vein bulged on Bradley's forehead as he picked up the pace, swinging his blades even harder as he attempted to simply overpower me. Unfortunately for him, this had an unintended side effect of making his attacks very much easier to predict, as they lost the grace and fluidity that he possessed when he was calm. Well, he was Father's wrath personified, so it made sense he'd have a short fuse. I held on to a smirk as I deflected his attacks away from me before stepping closer to him, closing the distance between us a bit, reducing the effectiveness of his longer sabers a bit while making it easier to hit him with my kodachi. Besides, your eye is not as ultimate as you seem to believe, good at prediction, but tell me, can a glance trap your target in an illusion? I smirked as he quickly moved his eyes away from mine instinctively. It was unfortunate, but I wasn't actually able to use genjutsu on him, because he had no chakra to speak of, but that brief moment of lost eye contact was enough for me to make use of my offhand, that I had been keeping myself from using, to lunge forward and plant itself onto his chest. Chakra scalpel, I announced as the chakra pooling around my hand surged into his body, shredding his internal organs into a fine mulch. A shame that your homunculus side is holding you back so much, I commented as he coughed out blood, his eyes wide in shock. Humans are much more cautious about getting injured, you should have been a bit more careful. A flash of light pulled him away before he could reply, not that I was expecting any, as his lungs were just plain gone. You have killed King Bradley. Zetsugen, looted and stored in inventory. I blinked as I looked at the item that I had gotten after killing Bradley. Zetsugen. Ultimate Eye. Oh, ha. Opening my inventory, I pressed on the Ouroboros symbol that represented the Zetsugen, and read the item description. Zetsugen, a vision-based enhancement that increases one's predictive ability tenfold. I blinked before rereading the description before grinning. Oh yes, I chuckled as I hit the apply option and confirmed it. My eyes swam a bit as I staggered before my vision came back into focus. And holy crap, was everything in focus, every little movement around me, I could predict and I just knew where it was going. This was going to take some getting used to. But for now, I had some planning to do. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.